In this week's episode of Pluribus, we are introduced to the mysterious man in Paraguay. Zosia and the others are asked some difficult questions. Carol starts testing some new theories and discovers something very significant. And the official Pluribus podcast reveals some surprising behind-the-scenes insights. Today, we're talking about episode 4, Carol Please. We're almost at the halfway mark now to the series finale on Boxing Day. So if you haven't caught up, check out my previous Pluribus videos after you have, and be warned, there will be spoilers ahead for episode 4. And trust me, you do not want this episode spoiled for you if you haven't watched it yet. Subscribe so you don't miss next week's Pluribus video and my upcoming reviews. Roll the intro. So let's dive into my breakdown, recap, and review of this episode of Pluribus, episode 4, Carol Please. So we open in a new location, a new set we haven't seen before, and a new character we haven't seen before. Initially, I was trying to figure out if we were following one of the others doing a task or whether this was one of the few people who had not joined the joining yet. And we discover through this scene that this is actually the mysterious guy from Paraguay who Carol tried to contact earlier in the show, I believe in episode 3. And we see he's listening to radio frequencies and writing them down. He's got a notebook filled with notes, so he's trying to figure out something. My theory at this point is that he's trying to listen for other people who are maybe using ham radios to contact other people, trying to reach out and find other people who are not part of the others, or who might be able to give some insight into what's actually going on. And we can see he's secluded himself inside the office of a storage unit facility, and he's living off any food he can find nearby. And he's now starting to run out of food to the point where he's now resorted to licking lids from empty cans in a bin. So clearly he's living off crumbs at this point. And we see as well the others, just like with Carol, they're trying to feed him, give him meals. They put one out on a silver plate, as they did before, outside the gates of this storage facility. And he looks across outside the window for his blinds. And one of the others, waves over, and he just ignores them, waits for them to drive off, and then goes over to the food and looks forlornly at the food. He looks like he's contemplating whether to potentially eat it or not, but he ends up sighing and using a broomstick to just knock it off the table that it's been put on, so it collapses on the floor and all the food goes everywhere. He then goes back to the office and he writes a note in Spanish saying, management will reimburse you for any damages done to your unit. And he goes around and he breaks the locks off of the storage units in search for food. And so there's a little montage of him doing that. And he gets back to his office, and on the table is everything he's found. And it's some like pouches of sugar and some like sauces and some cans of dog food. So it's at this point, as he's eaten the sauces and the liquids, he's opened the dog food. He's about to take a bite with a spoonful of dog food. And this is pretty gross. In fact, on the official Pluribus podcast, it was revealed that the actor actually took it a bit far and was grossing out the crew. So he had to pare it back a bit because they were starting to retch, and it's pretty uncomfortable. This show seems to have a weird fascination with people licking things in an uncomfortable way. Like we had the donut in episode 1, and this can thing is equally off-putting. So as I said, he's just about to eat some dog food, and we see the other side of the conversation that Carol had with him played out. So the phone rings, he ignores it. Looks irritated because he kind of looks like he's looking forward to eating this dog food, but I'm probably just reading into this. There's no dialogue in this scene, so I don't know. But he looks annoyed and exasperated. He eventually picks up and he's like, leave me alone, you SOBs. That's the only thing he says in this scene. And this is after Carol's repeated attempts to speak to him in Spanish and tell her name and where she's from. And she then calls him back one more time just to swear at him and tell him to F off and call him an asshole. And it's at this point he realizes, maybe that wasn't one of them, because they don't insult him or treat him like that. So he writes down in his notebook, Carol S. Turker, ? And actually, it turns out that the way Carol said her name, Carol S. Turker, Carol Sturker, would sound to a Spanish speaker like she's saying Carol is Turkish. S. Turker translates to is Turkish. So he's possibly a bit confused about her name and she didn't properly say it. So whether that will come up or not, I'm sure it will. The writers behind the show seem to think of everything Vince Gilligan is known for being very detail orientated, and all these little breadcrumbs have gotten picked up before in his previous shows like Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad. So with that, we cut back to day 7. The timer is still going up. Carol is coming out of the hospital directly after her conversation with the FedEx guy at the end of episode 3. She ends up taking a police car from the hospital. She gets into another car, but it smelt too bad. And even in this crazy situation, she still has her standards, as it turns out. So there's a whole bunch of people outside her house working to fix the damage caused in the aftermath of the grenade explosion, including someone she points at and goes, "Do I know you? Do I know who you are? You're the mayor of Albuquerque." And he waves and goes, "Thanks for your vote. I used to be." And it turns out the official Pluribus podcast revealed that guy's actually the real current mayor of Albuquerque. So that was a funny little cameo. And the line he gives, "Thanks for your vote," is cute and funny. So after Carol exclaims, "Why are you here? Who gave you permission to do that?" And they say, "Oh, do you remember in the ambulance, you sort of nodded vacantly when we asked if we could help clear up the damage. Not to worry though, we're nearly finished. We'll clear out of here and we'll finish up later." So they all start clearing up, getting ready to leave. Carol goes back inside and she goes into her home office, which I don't believe we've seen yet as a room in this house. And there's a whiteboard that's up and it's filled with plot points for upcoming Waikaro book, her next book, her 5th book, I think it is. One of the notes I remember being on there was like, "Rabun dies for real this time, question mark, which I thought was quite funny." So she moves that aside. It's one of those whiteboards that can be moved out of the way and a new one can be put across, kind of like in an American classroom. And she writes a new heading on a new whiteboard, "What I know about them." So I saw this and I got really excited because I was like, yes, Carol's getting into detective mode now. Let's see what she can figure out and find out. So she writes bullet point list underneath this heading, "What I know about them." First one says, "Eager to please, would give me an A-bomb, question mark. They seem to have no limits onto what they will give to her to make her happy, which is a flaw that can be potentially exploited. Can't kill, not a fly, as we remember from episode 2. There was that whole conversation at the dinner table about them not killing animals even to eat, so their preference is vegetarian. So the third point said, "Don't play faves, like all jerks the same." So they treat everyone equally. They don't have any favorites or preference. "Trying to change me, exclamation mark." That's obviously a big point. They want to change Carol to have her join them, as we found out from episode 1, and they are very keen to do that. "Weirdly honest, question mark." And she stares at this for a bit, and then she goes back outside and she says, "I need a volunteer. I want to ask someone questions." She ends up picking a guy called Larry in a cycling outfit. And as ridiculous as this cycling outfit looks, it's actually a good storytelling reminder that all these people, all these others, have remained in the state of attire that they were during that event. So even a week later, they haven't changed into something else, I guess, because there were more important things to do in terms of clearing up the mess and the aftermath, or helping out people who haven't yet joined and keeping them placated and happy. So then they both sit down in a dining room, and this whole scene is shot and performed like a play, according to the official Pluribus podcast. They shot this whole thing multiple times all the way through. Both Ray Seahorn and this actor whose name I haven't looked up, I'm sorry, but he was excellent, just like the FedEx guy. He was able to come into this role. I imagine it's quite challenging as a guest actor to come into the show and just try and figure out what is this about. And apparently this actor said it was a joy to be given the time to really get into the scene and explore it, because typically on TV shows, you're not given a lot of time. It's very much shoot and go. But they were given the time to do that on the show. And this all adds to it ultimately, because it makes this scene really stand out. And I think if you can make a scene that's just two people talking interesting, you've got a really good show or movie or piece of media on your hands, to be honest. So I love this scene. And it's really just Carol asking the others through Larry a bunch of questions. So she starts by asking them, what they think of her books. And they say, "Oh, we love them, Carol. We love them. We think they're amazing." And she's like, "Okay, do you know anything specific about it?" It's like, "We love the way you described this thing on page 2. It was just wonderful." And so she's like, "Sure, okay, right. Do you think they're as good as Shakespeare?" She's like, "Oh, yes, both excellent." She's like, "Better than Much Ado, Romeo and Juliet?" She's like, "Oh, yeah, we love them both." And so she's like, okay, rolls her eyes a bit. And then she asks what Helen thought of her books. And Larry looks a bit uncomfortable. And reminds her, you told us Helen was completely off limits. You didn't want to talk about her at all. And she goes, no, just this once. This will make me happy. What did Helen think of my books? It will make me happy to know. So Larry sighs and he says, well, she thought they were harmless. The word that she used the most in her mind was candy floss. And she loved candy floss, don't get me wrong. So, she loved them. Carol's like, okay, right. And Larry says, but, she appreciates the fact your Waikaro series gave you and her the life that they lived together, and she loved her life. So she respected it on that level. So then Carol asks, what did Helen think of my unpublished book? And as a reminder, this was brought up at the bar in episode 1, just before the big joining event occurred. Helen was encouraging Carol to release her unpublished book that she'd written about 400, 500 pages of, to finish that and to release it, because Carol was really passionate about it. So Carol asks, what did Helen think of that unpublished book? Larry says again, he sighs and goes, well, she thought it was fine. She got up to page 138. Because it was 400 pages long. She's like, yeah, she skipped to the last 2 pages and thought it wrapped up well. And she didn't think releasing it would affect your career too much and it would make you happy. That's why she wanted you to do it. So Carol tells Larry to leave and she looks pretty distraught. But also she goes back to the whiteboard and she rubs out the question mark next to weirdly honest, puts a full stop and writes can't lie, underline. So now she knows they can't lie. And this actor, again, did a great job, like the FedEx guy. And the actor playing Larry here does a great job, just like the FedEx guy before him. He embodies the other personality, for want of a better phrase, that Carolina Vidra, who plays Zosia, has created and laid the foundation for. And I imagine it must be challenging for guest actors to come onto this show that's quite an unusual concept. And one of those challenges they highlighted in the podcast is smiling, actually. And this applies to the extras as well. Apparently, it's very hard to smile that wildly with complete genuineness without it leaning too much into creepiness or slightly off-putting. So there was a lot of work done on smiling with honesty and sincerity and that coming across on screen, which turned out to be quite a hard balance to find. Carolina Vidra does that excellently. And as I said, she's laid the foundation for this other personality. Speaking of Zosia, we go back to the hospital where Carol goes to visit her. They have an interesting conversation after Zosia settled into her bed, and they talk a bit about a conversion therapy camp that Carol went to at 16 that she never forgave her mother for. And I can imagine that being quite an impactful and traumatic experience for Carol as a teenager. And Carol says to Zosia, can't you see this situation is the same? You're trying to change me. You're trying to convert me to your way. And Zosia says, well, you're trying to change us as well, aren't you? You want to know if you can reverse this thing. We know what it's like to be you, to be alone and depressed. We've all been you. We've experienced that, but you've never been us. You don't know what it's like to be us. So Carol asks Zosia, you said a week ago through the forestry secretary, this being at the end of episode 1 on the television, a week ago, you said you didn't know much about the joining because it just happened and you haven't figured it out. Do you know more now? And Zosia says, yes, we know a lot more now. We understand a lot more than we did. Carol asks, do you know now if the joining can be reversed? And Zosia looks very uncomfortable and says, I can't answer that. And Carol realizes that's an answer in itself because she even says, you would tell me if it couldn't be reversed, wouldn't you? And Zosia says, you're looking a bit troubled, Carol. Are you okay? 'Cause she's getting very animated. And Carol says, no, I'm actually happy. You've done it. I'm not troubled. This is me happy. You did it. You finally did it. And Carol leaves the room and she sneaks her way into the pharmacy of the hospital. And she's looking for a specific drug, some sort of anesthetic. We're not really sure what it is. I think it cuts to a page in the book, but I don't know enough about medicine to know what it is exactly. So at this point, I'm in the dark as to what she's looking for. But as she's rummaging, she gets found out. And so she asks this pharmacist for heroin as cover. And they have a funny little exchange. And the pharmacist asks, are you sure, Carol, after the last time? And Carol goes, what can I say? Sophomore year was a tough one. And he said, are you sure we can't interest you in something safer, that's been produced in a safer environment? And she's like, no, I want H. And so he goes, okay, the nearest heroin source is 8 minutes away. And then pauses a bit. It's on its way. And she has a really funny line and says, see, you guys are great when you work together. You're almost as good as dominoes. So Carol heads back home from the hospital with the heroin in a bag. And also she managed to sneak out the medicine she was looking for and some syringes. So she gets home, she flushes the H down the toilet, sets up a camcorder on the table. She has the drug and she has some needles ready to go. She hits record. She injects herself as she sits on the sofa. She sits back, and then it cuts to nighttime. She wakes up again. So she goes to the camcorder, puts it into the TV, plugs it in, and watches back. And there's some really hilarious clips here as Carol is under the influence of this drug. She's acting drunk at one point, and her speech is slurred, and she's talking about the others. So she's just ranting and raving about all kinds of nonsense. At one point, we see a quick clip of her really upset and distraught that she really misses someone. We can infer that's Helen, but she hasn't up until this point allowed herself to grieve that openly and that honestly. We also see her talking about Zosia, and she's like, oh, that woman's so annoying. Oh my goodness, Zosia. Oh, just because you didn't know her name. You know, all of this stuff. It's very funny, very, very funny, really entertaining. Until the point where she says, and why did she have to be so damn effable? And at that point, Carol stops the video and she goes, we have a winner. So we realise she was looking for truth serum. At least that's when I figured it out. Maybe you figured it out a lot sooner than that. Let me know in the comments. But Ray Seahorn on the official Pluribus podcast for this episode offered some insight into filming the scene and what made it a challenge. One of the things was learning all the lines because it was so disjointed, and there was about a 10-minute continuous take that they did a few times. Apparently there were loads of hilarious moments that were cut. She also did inside jokes for the crew as part of it, and the director and the crew, and the director who was also on this podcast episode, found it really hard not to laugh and ruin the takes as they were filming this. But it was just such a great scene that just revealed a lot of what's going on with Carol internally that she's hiding. And I think when that was revealed was when Carol realised, this truth serum actually works. So she heads back to the hospital and she suggests taking Zosia out for some fresh air. And she secretly administers the drug into her drip while in the elevator because Zosia's in a wheelchair. She wheels her out. And so she takes her outside into the courtyard and starts trying to ask her questions. And Zosia's getting visibly upset. You know, tears are starting to run down her face because Carol's asking her, how do I stop this? How do I reverse this? What do I need to do? Can you tell me? And Zosia, as I said, was getting really upset. And Carol's saying, is it making you upset that you can't tell me because it will make me happy? And she's like, yeah. She's just crying and she's getting really distressed. As this is happening, people come out of the hospital, come out of the doors. They start streaming. They start swarming around Carol and Zosia. A bit like blood cells attempting to stop a disease, like attacking something. And so they all come and they swarm around them. And something I noticed later on actually was that as this crowd of people form and they get closer and closer until Carol says, step back, they're actually forming the shape of a keyhole around Carol and Zosia. So almost as if visually suggesting that Carol is the key to this whole situation, or maybe Carol and Zosia together. And they start chanting, Carol, please, Carol, please. And Carol handcuffs herself to Zosia and says, you can't touch me. I'm a free agent. You can't touch me. You can't move me. This is my choice. And as the others are getting closer and are chanting, Carol, please, Zosia passes out. She collapses out of her wheelchair onto the floor, still handcuffed to Carol. And Carol says, what's happening to her? And they say, she's gone into cardiac arrest. Can we help her, Carol? So Carol says, yeah. And so she's looking on. There's a crowd of people around her. They're trying to resuscitate Zosia. Carol looks afraid, scared, concerned, mainly afraid because the others are acting in a pretty unusual way and are desperate to stop her finding out how to reverse this entire thing. And the episode ends with Zosia's fate up in the air and Carol surrounded. So this was just another excellent episode. Fantastic, bringing up lots of questions. Carol's really getting into detective mode now, trying to figure out how she can reverse this. And now that she knows she can, she's got new motivation to make that happen as soon as possible, because you know the others are working on a way to cure her and the other individuals who have yet to join the collective. So will Carol be able to turn people individually or en masse? How's she going to do that? Will the others try to stop her? No doubt, but how are they going to do that whilst also respecting her free will and her agency? And once people are turned, do they remember any of the collective knowledge, or if there's other secrets that perhaps the others all know but aren't revealing to Carol and these other individuals? Will Zosia, in fact, potentially medically be dead and therefore revert back to who she was? Maybe that's what needs to happen in order for someone to leave the collective, or maybe that's one possible, quote, cure, although not a very reliable one to replicate. And what is going on with that guy in Paraguay? I think it's clear at some point him and Carol are going to cross paths and will meet, and that'll be interesting in itself. But I think he's going to have his own part to play individually as well. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that develops across this season and indeed over the remaining seasons, which Vince Gilligan has revealed he has a 4-season plan for this show, which right now I can't imagine how this show goes much beyond the season 1. But no doubt, as he has done with his previous shows, season 1 is very much a slow burn of reveals before things really ramp up and it digs into really explosive and dynamic scenarios. So there are so many questions, but this show continues to explore, as all the best sci-fi films and TV shows do, what it means to be human, asking questions about humanity and shining a light on us through a fantastical or otherworldly premise. And once again, I cannot wait to see where the show goes. And I trust Vince and his writing team to stick the landing and take us on a satisfying ride, as they have with Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. But I open the floor up to you now. What do you think of Pluribus so far? And have you heard or thought of any interesting theories yourself? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you to those of you who subscribed after the last video. If you want to make me happy, consider subscribing. We're at 130 subscribers now. It'd be great if you would join us. Thank you once again so much for watching. Check out my previous Pluribus videos or my latest film review of Guillermo del Toro's adaptation of Frankenstein, now on Netflix. I'll see you next time.